first of a 12-part series, and I'll be doing the same thing on my other various social media platforms. I want to keep this very concise and focused, despite the fact that I definitely have ADHD, and it's very difficult for me to stay on topic with so many, as they call it, dilutions that have taken place. And what do I mean by diluting? Anything that you add water to or dilute becomes less strong, less clear, less concentrated, right? So there have been a number, and by a number, I mean too many to count, into the thousands, possibly 10,000s of intrusions that could be referred to as diluting the situations that have taken place with me. So let's start with this. I have a 10-year history of healthcare industry career. My education formally, pardon me, my education formally began as a nursing student doing gen ed prereqs for entry to the nursing program. I also, during that time, became a certified medical assistant and phlebotomist through Illinois School of Medical Careers, which ultimately lost its accreditation, and they were doing federal student loan forgiveness on that program. That was a one-year program. I also did a medical office specialist program, HIPAA, medical law and compliance, through the First Institute in Lombard, Illinois. That was just like a 6-month certification program for billing, coding, HIPAA, OSHA, and medical standards with regards to what you have to do to not get sued, and for reimbursement from the doctors. So I did that. Following that, I started community college, and I decided that I wanted to take the medical assisting experience I had and take my prerequisites for nursing. I had a plan to go to West Suburban Nursing School, which is a 4-year school. All nursing schools for RN are 4 years or more, not including gen eds. If you do, the way that I was taking the program, if you do decide that you want to be an LPN, you can exit after 36 months, I want to say, or 24. And then later on, there's an LPN acceleration program where you can go from LPN to RN, be SRN, or just bachelor's degree to RN. I'm not sure which one, just completely online once you have the LPN. But there's so many clinical hours that are required to be on campus. So I started at College of DuPage for just gen eds. I transferred to Triton College. I got a whole bunch more gen eds. I did all of like the normal business gen eds, so speech, economics, biology, chemistry, parenting, things like that, English, things like that, just regular gen eds that you have to have before you can even be considered for a spot on the waiting list for nursing. At that time, I had two small children, Vivi and Louis. When I first started school as a medical assistant, I was pregnant with Viviana, and I wanted to work, who's now 19 years old, and I wanted to work as soon as possible, which is why I chose medical assisting rather than nursing. I needed to work. I needed money. I needed to stabilize. I needed to purchase a house for my kids. This has been my goal since before my children were born. But no matter how many hours I put into, school, I still was on and off working in the household, and also recovering from a whole bunch of adversity over my teenage years. And what that means is without any sort of criminal record or reason. So I had not done any crimes. I had never tried a drug. I had never tried a drop of alcohol. I was sent to Jamaica to this WWASP school called Tranquility Bay, where I was left in a third world country with no warning or understanding of why or when I would come home. And the school was closed down for many, many, many counts of aggravated or allegations of aggravated abuse against children, financial, psychological, sexual, and physical. I did witness them break a guy's arm like it was a twig, like it was a fucking popsicle stick right in front of me. So that happened. Now, trying to readjust to regular life was very hard and scary. When I came home, I had my own apartment, and I had never been alone before. I went from the family home setting to a setting, a dorm style, with probably 20 other women in the same space where I was sleeping. The only exception to that was, as I said, as soon as I aged out of these types of programs that I was in from 14 to 18, I was able to get my own apartment. And from there, there was a lot of transitioning, a lot of moving around, a lot of being, how I felt thrown around without stability. Can you get me a C4 and some rainstorms? Does this jewel have them? You have the card, right? I'll try right now. It's not in the trunk. Just try it, this jewel, please. So, I started my career path from a huge deficit, comparatively speaking. My peer groups had already been socializing with other people in their age group for years, attending work for years, having free will, being able to go to parties and proms and homecomings, and that was just not the situation for me. I had nothing, I did nothing, I was institutionalized with women who were there for drugs, for gang violence, for murders, for thefts, huge thefts. And I'm not talking about going into the store or eating, someone else's lunch at work. I'm talking about, elaborate schemes where people were purchasing remote controlled garage door openers, universal garage door openers, and programming them in Hinsdale and Elmhurst and Oak Brook, and going into people's homes while they were at work and just emptying out their entire garage at the pawn shops all around Chicago, and just various things like that. These were big crimes from where I'm from. I had never interacted with or had experience with criminals in this regard before. So I was 14 years old and basically being exposed to a demographic that was there for either crimes like that or because they were completely insane, depressed, or like self harming. I had never done any of those things. So, my mom, I don't think was in control of these situations. And I do also feel there was a significant amount of using my life to see what was going on in the facilities and lives of other people, which, by the way, I was never compensated for, if anyone cares. Now, on top of that, um, psychologically, when you're separated at 18 years old from your family, when you come from a single family home with your mother, your sister, your father, that's how I was raised from birth all the way until I was 14. I was in a household of four people: my mother, my sister, and my father, and I. And we lived in this pretty stable environment where my daily looked like this: wake up, go to school on the bus, or my mom would drop us off. The bus stop was a block away. We went to school with all the same neighborhood kids and all the same kids from our neighborhood, that we played with: Ghost in the Graveyard, and, obstacle courses, and rollerblading up and down the street, and, all of these little regular, kid stabilities that you don't even identify as a stable thing or as being stability, but it is. And in its absence, it hurts and you feel scared and you don't know, especially at 14, what is going on. And the way that I had to go there was this: it was a week before my birthday. My birthday is January 12th, and my life path is 11/2, KB. With that being said, my mom called me and she said, for your birthday, we're going to take you to Jamaica for a religious retreat. Don't tell your father, because we know he doesn't have a lot of money right now. He's going through financial turmoil. My father had been incarcerated for not being able to pay child support. My father, and he worked, hit full time until his body gave out, and they just put him in there. They put him in DuPage County Work Release Program, no phone, no car, in the winter, and they made him walk from that facility just randomly around Wheaton asking people for jobs. And he had to explain to everyone, how humiliating is it that he was in prison because he had a $20,000 purge, which a judge in the divorce said that my father had to come up with all of this money, and my father didn't have it. My father left my mother everything: the house, the cars, everything. So it was just a fucked up situation. I'm seeing my father who works, just as hard as my mother does. My mother was always a hard worker. She would always work two jobs. My father would work manual physical labor. Um, and he had just, been released from this work release program, and he had no idea what was going on, and we saw him on the weekends. And my mom said, don't tell your dad, because we don't want him to get, to feel bad or inadequate, that he can't get you a birthday gift like this. She had been remarried to my stepfather, who was a big fancy stockbroker for the Board of Trade. And, my father was unfairly incarcerated. Like, you can't, it would be one thing if he was making a gang of money and refusing to help. It was never like that. My father was, giving what he could give and spending very little outside of what he could give. Paying his rent, and that's it. Kind of reminds me of how I'm living right now, if we're being honest. But so I get sent to this place, and my mom's telling me, we're going to leave tomorrow. She told me the day before, we're going to leave tomorrow on your actual birthday. We're going to be there around 4 in the morning to pick you up. I was sleeping over at my Aunt Marilyn's house. And don't worry about packing a bag. We're only allowed to travel with bins. And I have your bin packed. And I'm like, a bin? What the fuck does that mean? So you're only allowed to bring a Rubbermaid bin, because when you arrive at this place, you're in uniform the entire time. You're not allowed to bring shit. You can't have anything. So here I am thinking I'm going to take a beautiful Jamaican vacation, and the plane lands, and my mom says, you're not coming back with us. And I said, what do you mean I'm not coming back with you? I'm 14 years old. And she said, you're not coming back with us. I was listening to an album, Word of Mouth by Ludacris. And I remember the song. I remember everything. I was listening to that song, Move, Bitch, Get Out. I'm doing 100 on the highway. So if you do the speed limit, get the fuck out of my way. And I said out loud, I'm DUI, hardly ever caught sober, and you about to get ran the fuck over. And my mom had never heard me swear before. I'd never cursed in front of my mother. And it was just as easy as that, that she didn't even speak to me with compassion anymore. She wanted me gone. And she did not like, the way that I was living. And the way that I was living was, I had no social group. I worked in a movie theater. I was not allowed to hang out with my friends, but I listened to rap music. That was, what was going on. And she said, because I was listening to that music, I spoke with a nasty attitude. I was 14 years old. And that I, needed an adjustment to my attitude. That was her entire deal, So it was very, fucked up for me, because I didn't feel like that was not only fair, but only having a few hours to prepare for something like that. And I was already in Jamaica landed, when she told me. Then we get to this place, and I still didn't think it was true. And she just leaves me there. And I had the return flight home information. And I remember thinking, there's no way they're going to leave me. Maybe they're going to scare me for a few days, maybe for 3 days, 4 days. But when this flight is set to go back to Chicago, I'll be on it. And that flight, date and time came, and then it went. And I was not on that flight with my family. I was left in Jamaica for a year. No communication with my peers, not allowed to call home. You could write a letter once a week on Sundays. They gave us 30 minutes to write a letter. But they read all the letters, and if you said anything about any of the abusiveness that was going on in the situation, they said you were a manipulator, and they wouldn't send your letter home to your parents. So it was a very fucked up situation. Then I come back from Jamaica, and you know who calls people manipulators? People who can't manipulate them. Literally. What's going on, Xavier? One C4, and the rains are usually 3 for 5. Watch this bicyclist. Please hurry. So that happened. So during this time that I'm starting my career in healthcare, all I'm thinking about is, I don't want to be that mom that is not there for her kids. If I take a 4 year education in a traditional education setting, I'm not going to be home at all, because I'm going to have to work to support myself and my children, and be in school full time. So I found a hybrid online, as well as with American Intercontinental University. I transferred over my credits, And I started doing only my sciences on campus: biology, chemistry, anything that needed lab, I would do on campus, and everything else I would do online. The kid's father was always helpful. He would go to work and bring me his check. But back in these days, the checks for full time employment, minimum wage in a factory setting, were like $200 or $300 a week. So it was really not shit, especially for a mom and a dad with two small babies. And I just remember being so thirsty, so hungry for financial independence. I was raised in a middle class household. The property value around where I grew up could easily range into the millions. And the people, were pretty classy, from a traditional sense of the word. And that's how I grew up. We went to church every Sunday. We went to Sunday school. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. She would still have drinks and stuff during the week. We would still go to her girlfriend's house on the weekends and have a pool day on Saturday or whatever. But that was the way that I grew up. I had structure. I woke up in the morning. I walked to the bus stop with my sister, went to school, came home. We had to sit down at the kitchen table and do our homework until it was done. We could not move. No snacks, no anything until dinner time. When my father got home from work between 4 and 4:30, we would get home from school around 3:30 or 4. My father would get home from work between 4 and 4:30. He would check our homework, make sure that it was done. If it was done, we could go outside and play until the street lights came on. My mom would get home around 6, 6:30, sometimes 7. She'd make dinner, we'd eat. We'd go straight to the bathtub after dinner. We'd put on one or two shows. My mom would make us a late night snack, usually a fruit plate, sometimes a bowl of ice cream. And then we'd brush our teeth and go to bed. And it was the same every single day until that major disruption when I was 14 years old and I got, sent to Jamaica. When I came home from Jamaica, I was put in all these fucking places. You have no idea. Group homes, residential living facilities where girls would spend 3, 4, 5 years there. I only spent about 3 months in each of these facilities. I think the longest facility I ever stayed in was Jamaica. I was there for almost 1 year. And then when I left Jamaica, I was in the DuPage County 6 month program, and that was for running away from home. Had no criminal activity in my record, had never tried any drug, not a single drug in my entire life, ever. Was not associated or affiliated with any crimes or any sort of, unlawful behavior. Had never been in a fist fight, didn't know how to use a weapon, had never seen a gun in real life, nothing like that, nothing at all. So I'm adjusting to life back home. And as a free person at 18 years old, 17, I aged out of the system, and got an apartment at 17. And they considered me an adult at that time and terminated my, I don't know what you could call it when the system decides where they're going to put you. My mom had no say so anymore. I went to Jamaica. When I came from Jamaica, I ran away one time and they assigned me a PO called Kathy Bakken, and Kathy Bakken became the person who was responsible for everything that was going to go on with me from then on. And Kathy Bakken looked evil. She was very dark, dark hair, dark brows, very thick and bushy. Um, and that's when I first started to realize that there was good and there was evil in this world, and that there were people who would prey on kids, and that's fucked up. Um, with that being said, I didn't do anything like the rest of the girls did. The psychological disorders in these facilities were tremendous. When I tell you that these women would cut their arms so deeply and so all over their bodies, they would just have these huge cut marks. And I've spoken about this girl. Shout out to Tammy. I don't know her last name and I don't want to embarrass her, but there was a girl that I was in a facility with for approximately 5 to 7 months who they had to shave her head because she was disturbed. She would get upset and grab her hair by the handful and just yank it out. Like, have you ever yanked out a weed by the root? Okay, she wasn't just yanking the tops off her hair, the weed, the tops off the weeds. She was going in and getting it by the root, and her scalp would just begin bleeding. And they had to shave her head because of it. And this was what I was, in a facility with. This is what was around me for 14 to 18, 17 and a half years old. There were a very small handful of girls that I felt I could relate to, who were from backgrounds similar to my own, who didn't, in my eyes, didn't deserve to be in that sort of incarceration. It was sick, and from where I was sitting, I needed to have watch my back at all times. I needed to There was never any time to process the feelings of abandonment and being, thrown out of the house at that age. at 14. You know, being dropped off in a foreign country where you're told you're not allowed to speak to even your peers. We're going to break some guy's arm in front of you. I don't know if it's an intimidation tactic. They claimed that he was being unruly. I didn't witness any of that. A girl jumped off of the balcony to kill herself, a 14-year-old little girl, and they had to install bars from the balcony railing to the top of the balcony. This is where I was, and this place advertised themselves to my mother as like a volleyball retreat camp. Like, oh yeah, they'll be out on the beach playing sand volleyball, having a real, good time. And we were not allowed to go on the beach. If we even looked in the direction of the beach, we were on the coast. I mean, we were about 10 feet away from the ocean. If we looked over the 30 or 40-foot walls while we were on the upper level of the deck where our school was to look at the ocean, they charged us with something called run plans and put us in a place called observation placement where you laid on your face on cement, similar to how they kept me my entire pregnancy on the cement at Belmont Harbor Yacht Club and attached my entire pregnancy with Weston, which, by the way, I've never received any restitution on any of that either, or an explanation, or even a fucking apology. Um, but moving forward from that, I began a career in healthcare. I got a job in multiple different locations and settings. I was working at Gottlieb Hospital. I was working at West Suburban Medical Group. And I got another job, my first job after medical assisting school, assisting a doctor with um, infrared coagulation on hemorrhoids. After that, it was a pedicure type of position where I would soak the toenails of the elderly, big, thick, nasty toenails that they could not see or maintenance on their own, in preparation for the podiatrist to come through and either remove the infected toenail or manicure the toenails. Patients with diabetes who had limited mobility commonly were not permitted to cut their own toenails because claudication causes numbness in the extremities, specifically the fingertips and the tips of the toes. When you have that going on, it's not plus, visual impairments, which many diabetics have visual impairments combined with claudication, which is, it could be diabetic retinopathy. There are just a million different things that could cause it. But not having clear vision combined with not having 100% feeling in your extremities causes people to cut the skin, the flesh, and then that flesh becomes infected. And when you cut your flesh and you don't see it or feel it because you have a decrease in sensitivity due to the claudication, there's a huge, or not so much today in 2025 anymore, but back then in 2000, early 2000s when I started my career in medicine, it was very common for people to have gangrene and need amputation. I mean, that was a real thing. There were people without fingers, without arms, without feet because they were getting their limbs cut off because they would injure themselves or cut themselves with a nail clipper. And, their foot would fall off or their toe would fall off. Literally, it would turn literally infected and it would either be removed or, just die. And necrosis would cause, the limb to just literally fall off. So I worked in various medical fields, and I think that the real purpose for that, when you're a doctor or a nurse, you get what they call a residency or an internship. And when you have those residencies and internships, you go on rotations in different medical kind of um, specialties. So you could do OB 1 month, you could do ER medicine the next month, you could do primary care and internal medicine the next month, you could do podiatry the next month, you could do neurology the next month. You can choose what major you'd like to specialize in or what specialty you'd like to specialize in, and then you can kind of play the field until you decide what you want. I didn't get that option. I had to take the first job that I could find at all times. But I quickly found out what I liked and what I didn't like. Podiatry was not for me, probably is part of the reason why I have a phobia of feet to this very day, or a general disgust or dislike. Now, with that being said, I do appreciate the fact that I got to work in so many different capacities. I worked also in a cardiovascular institute with Parag Doshi, Chicago Cardiovascular Institute in Elk Grove Village, which has now turned into a huge thing. This doctor went from like one single office
Go get the dice from
when I met him and worked with
bride's
him
box.
to one of the
It's on the
largest
table. At least it
cardiovascular
was.
groups, practices in the Midwest area. So reputable. So I was, very grateful to learn these things. At that job, I actually got my very first sterile assistant job, meaning I needed to sterilize all of the equipment and scrub the doctor in for surgery. So there's a protocol when you give a doctor sterile garb, you have to only handle it from the inside out. You have to wear sterile gloves yourself.
Sure.
You have to cover your mouth. There's a very specific, way that you need to prepare the doctor for this type of surgical procedure. And I was really grateful to be able to be a part of that and to learn that. It turns out that I actually was working a little bit below my pay grade. And so I found a job at Northwestern Hospital, which was my longest relationship with the medical field. I was there for about 6 years. I was hired to work in endocrinology, assisting Dr. Renee Aronson, and then doing coverage for Walter Staller. By the end of the time I was there, I also had taken on rheumatology. I had Dr. Clary Scamra, Linda Maletti, and Angelica Paul. I worked with a nurse, Teresa Corsentino.
Bride's choice. Trust
in
your
that,
gut.
Regard. She did most of the
That's your family,
catalog
so I guess that's
injections
good.
and clinical preparation, and I handled everything
Bride's
else.
choice. I'll listen to you today.
So there was a lot
There we
going
go.
on there,
You're in
and
charge
I was
today.
a great employee there for 5-6 years. In 2015, now mind you, during that time I had two small children, Viviana and Lewis, who were about 18 months from each other. They lived with me full time with their father. When their father and I separated, they started living with me 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And my ex's parents, the suegro, would come and pick them up from my house and bring them to school, pick them up from school, babysit them for about an hour afterwards. And then when I would get home from work, I lived in Elmwood Park at that time, they would bring them to me. It was during this time that I also found out I was pregnant with Alexis. And Orlando and I, Alexis's father, had been together for 3 years before I found out that before I ended up getting pregnant. I'm also on birth control for anyone
No, I'm
who's,
good.
thinking otherwise. I got pregnant with all of my children on some form of birth control.
Okay.
I've never just been impregnated by chance, but for that reason, I always say you can never take away my job as a mother. You'll never get it from me ever, no matter what you do or how good you think you are. I wasn't supposed to get pregnant ever, and I have 4 living, healthy, I don't want to call them rambunctious. They're intelligent, well-spoken, fun, motivated, really cool kids. So, that's that. Some higher power gave me those children. Some power way higher than human life. Um, Now, when I left my career in the medical field, I've discussed this so many times, and I'm going to go on for right now. We're at 28 minutes. I'm going to go 2 more minutes, and then we're just going to pick up in the second part of the 12-part series, maybe tomorrow. I don't like to get into all of it too much at one time, but um, I got a job at Northwestern because I wanted to feel like my kids could be proud to tell people what their mother did for a living. I wanted a career, not just a job. And I wanted to be doing something that was helpful, that saved people's lives and brought joy and happiness to people's lives. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I thought I was doing. One day, after working way too much for way too long, way too many hours, for way too little pay, and having a late postpartum hemorrhage with my daughter Alexis, um, I got reprimanded at Northwestern and accused of gender and sexual orientation discrimination. I actually interviewed a woman named Gina, a lesbian, who introduced herself to me as the rocket science student with the dykey haircut. And I thought it was so funny. And I thought, this girl's hilarious. She's a team player. Like, I interviewed her thoroughly. She had everything that we were looking for. I let the doctors all interview her. They liked her. I'm like, let's hire her. I recommended her for hire. After I came back from the late postpartum hemorrhage, this woman had the audacity, she's a bitch, okay, period, had the audacity to tell my superiors that I was gender discriminating against her because I referred to her as Gina with the dykey haircut, which is the way she introduced herself to me. And I thought a little inside joke that we had. So she reported it to HR. I got called down to HR. HR wanted me to work for free a sixth day of the week, Saturdays. And I decided that that was not possible. I had three small children. I was not going to come in on Saturdays to do sensitivity training. So I left. I went back to my office after 6 years of working for Northwestern Hospital and for my doctors, and without giving any sort of, verbal description of the circumstances, completely frustrated working, 50 plus hours a week, and unpaid because we were not allowed to receive overtime at Northwestern. You had to clock out at 40 hours. So no matter if my work was done or not, I was there off the clock, working. And I left, and within a week, I already got an offer as an office manager at an ophthalmology clinic. And I loved that because there it was like I got to do purchasing. I got to purchase designer frames. I got to work with manufacturers like Luxottica. I got to, do the shopping. I got to do everything, from the ground up billing, coding, clinical preparation with regards to visual field examination, and numerous other things. I really liked it. I was working for three doctors. And Orlando and I broke up. That's Alexis's dad. I got into a space where, for the first time in my entire life, Saturday and Sunday would come around and I had no significant other, and my kids were with their fathers. And I was alone in my apartment as a 27-year-old woman for the first time in my entire life. So I went and got a job working bottle service for Saturday and Sunday. So I was still working full-time as an office manager in a doctor's clinic, and then I took a bottle service job on the weekend. And that's where I'll leave you guys for today. I hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope that everyone will be tuning in sometime tomorrow or watching the replay. I like to do these live because I am going to be using this 12-part series to hire someone. I'm hoping to start working with them soon, within the next week, to create my documentary. I want to keep it to an hour long, but be really informative, so that I can also start fundraising for solutions. But so we're leaving off with, I have, been working at this point in time. It's 2015. I have been working in healthcare for 10 years. I recently got a job as a bottle service person, and my kids are living with me Monday through Friday. I have three children living with me Monday through Friday, and going to their fathers on the weekends. So we're throwing it back to pre-Weston times. And like I said, happy Thanksgiving, you guys, and I look forward to picking up with part 2 of 12.